Ketel Marte is no longer available as the Diamondbacks have pulled their all-star second baseman off the trade market. However, that did not stop them from making a trade over the weekend. We'll talk about the latest news on Ketel Marte, plus a dive into the trade on this episode of the D-backs Under Review podcast. And hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of D-backs Under Review podcast. I am your host, Michael McDermott. So, Ketel Marte stays is the primary topic of this podcast. The Diamondbacks have pulled Ketel Marte off the trade market, which means Mike Hazen is no longer entertaining offers on their all-star second baseman, and the Diamondbacks can move on to building their roster with Ketel Marte around for 2026. And as we get into that, I ask you to please subscribe to the D-backs Under Review channel, leave a like, and hit that bell for notifications so that way the next time we upload a podcast episode, which is every Monday, Friday at 9 a.m. Arizona time, you'll get a notification. But if you just circle your calendar and say Arizona time, 9 a.m. every Monday, Friday, you shouldn't miss it at all either. And also, consider subscribing to the D-backs Under Review newsletter, which you can find at dbacsunderreview.com, coming across right now on the ticker. You can see it on the screen if you're watching. If you're listening to the podcast on your favorite podcast medium, it is dbacsunderreview.com, D, no hyphen, after the D and before the B, dbacsunderreview.com. You can also follow me, Mike McDermott, on Twitter at MikeMcD8393, or D-backs Under Review X channel at D-backs Review for the times I actually publish something on there. So, as we get started, Ketel Marte is off the market. That's major ramifications across the rest of the baseball world, as perhaps the most interesting hitter in the trade market is now not available. That's going to have downwind implications, as you can see also in the list of topics that Alex Bregman's market is also highly impacted on the Ketel Marte decision. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, and I felt like throughout the offseason, I think Hazen kind of preferred it as well. It felt like, unless the Diamondbacks got blown away with a trade offer, that Marte was going to stay a Diamondback. Again, you look at his contract, 5 years, $91 million. And he still got $46 million deferred, if you count the $5 million that was deferred from his 2025 salary, and the $41 million the next 5 years. And then considering the fact that Marte will now have 10-5 rights, the 6-year option that's valued at $11.5 million is now a considerable possibility. That is an opt-in player option for Ketel Marte, and I feel like with the 10-5 no trade protection, I think there is now a serious consideration that may be exercised. So there is a pretty good chance that Marte could be a Diamondback through the 2031 season. Of course, his exit from the Diamondbacks, he now has control in that one. If Ketel Marte wants to remain a Diamondback through the 2031 season, there's not much the team can do about that. As you know, 10-5 rights is when a player reaches 10 years of Major League service time, which Ketel Marte will hit on April 5th. He will hit 10 years on April 5th. I put April 6th because that's opening day plus 10 days. So he'd be at 10 years and 1 day on April 6th. So he would hit 10-5 rights that morning. And because pretty much all of it came with Arizona, I think he had like a year and change when the Diamondbacks picked him up from the Mariners after the 2016 season. Once he hits 10-year service time, 10-5 rights kick in. Marte cannot be traded without his consent, which does limit the amount of options and the leverage the Diamondbacks have in trading Marte if they ever had to get down to that. Although, I feel like if the Diamondbacks are in a situation where they feel like they have to trade Marte, they're not necessarily worried about the return, even though he's on a very affordable contract. I feel like this offseason was the best time to see what teams had to offer before trading him became problematic. And that doesn't mean they were necessarily committed to the idea of trading him, unless they got an offer that was blow your socks off type offer. And we know from various reports from other teams, the Diamondbacks were seeking in a deal with Boston. I think Marcelo Mayer, the third baseman, shortstop turned third baseman, was considered. We don't know if they were also looking at Peyton Tolley and Connelly early, which we assume is the case because Diamondbacks were looking for an established starting pitcher. I don't know if Brian Bayo came up in talks. I know that Bayo is a player that a lot of teams have asked about with the Red Sox. I wrote that story for Heavy Sports, which is where I go for my where I go to write right now. Like I said, that's kind of where I am at right now. So then going also to the Mariners offer, Diamondbacks were looking for an established starting pitcher, so that could have been Brand Wu, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Bryce Miller. Those could have been options as well. I don't think Arizona was necessarily interested in Emerson Hancock. And obviously Luis Castillo certainly was on the board. The Diamondbacks were looking to save money on a Ketel Marte trade. They're not going to take Luis Castillo, who costs $7 million more on the CBT than Marte does. Well, a little less than 7. Even if it is a starting pitcher upgrade, Castillo is certainly better, I would say, in everyone but Merrill Kelly and Ryan Nelson, for sure. If you look at the Diamondbacks rotation. But Seattle necessarily wasn't interested in Bryce Miller Plus. I would have tried to get Miller and Brash if there was a Seattle trade, and I mentioned that in a previous episode about Marte and his trade rumors holding up the offseason. Of course, now that he's no longer on the trade market, the offseason's kind of picked up. And that obviously has a downward effect on Alex Bregman and Bo Bichette. Although I think they would have signed any. I think less to do with Bichette. With Marte, because most of the teams that were in on Bichette were out on Marte already at that point. But anyways, when you look at the 2026 Diamondbacks, like I said, 1 through 4 is pretty good in the lineup. That's kind of the strength of the team as it is. Like you have 4 all-star hitters at the top of your lineup. You got Perdomo in the leadoff spot, who's the best shortstop in baseball in 2025. If he's the best shortstop in 2026, then we're probably looking at a better season. The best shortstop in the National League in 2025. Ketel Marte is the best second baseman in baseball, though Nico Hoerner certainly closed that gap a little bit. And Hoerner himself is now the subject of trade rumors when we get to the next point as well. And then the Diamondbacks have a burgeoning star in right field with Corbin Carroll as their 3-hitter. Because Carroll's coming off the first ever 30-homer, 30-steal season in Diamondbacks history. Because, of course, he does. Let's have the monumental feat. And Corbin Carroll found the 30-30 club. And he might be the only Diamondback to ever do that. And I'm serious about that one. I don't know if there are any 30-homer threats in their system that can actually hit. But, so you got Carroll, and then you got Moreno, who I wrote as a breakout candidate for having. Of course, that was Steve Gilbert's pick for the Diamondbacks breakout candidate, and I feel like Moreno will break out when he's healthy. He's going to produce a 15 to 20 homer season. He hit 9, despite the fact he missed 2 months with a with a hairline fracture in his hand. Because if you look at Moreno's, and I mentioned that as when I talked about Moreno's breakout candidate, quality contact metrics took a major step forward in 2025, which, if sustained in 2026 or improved, Moreno becomes the Diamondbacks' 4th best hitter by default. And I feel like when you have Perdomo 138 WRC plus as your leadoff man, and Marte at 145 as your 2-hole hitter, Carroll at 139, and then Moreno at 117. Those are your top 4 hitters. Now, of course, for the Diamondbacks to actually contend, they're going to need more than those 4 in the lineup. We've got to see what Jordan Lawler can provide over the course of a full season. I feel like with Lawler, if you can get 100, you're feeling really good. And I don't know how he'll play defensively. He should have more range than the typical third baseman, but the arm strength thing and the arm itself might be a problem. Ask Tyler Locklear about that. The arm issue with Lawler, I feel like if he can get reps at third base, and now with Marte there, Lawler can just focus on playing third base, because Lawler carries more upside than Alexander. I'd rather give Lawler the reps at third base, knowing that he's the superior offensive talent. It's like, now he knows he's sticking at one position, you just have him get reps there defensively at third, and you'll just let the bat shine, knowing that Alexander is a good fallback option at third base if Lawler can't stick there defensively or can't hit. Of course, the can't hit thing is certainly a different issue than the defense-only issue. So I think you're going to be looking at an infield of Lawler, Perdomo, Marte, and Pavin Smith to start the 2026 season. And then we might see Diamondbacks make their moves at the position soon enough. But that's pretty much it. Like I said, Ketel Marte is a Diamondback for as long as he wants to at this point. So, and then moving on to the next section, Alex Bregman, of course, his free agent situation resolved itself not too long after Marte's decision on Marte was made. Less than, well, we could say about 24 to 30 hours after the decision on Marte was made by the Diamondbacks, that Bregman agreed to a 5-year, $175 million deal with the Chicago Cubs. That deal is heavily deferred, $70 million, so we're talking 20% of Bregman's contract is deferred, which lowers the average annual to about 30 per year, which is what it's going to hit the Cubs luxury tax number. Now, of course, when I wrote the thing, I put $35 million a year. Of course, I should update that, but Bregman is going to obviously. I think the thing with Bregman was I think Bregman had multiple teams that offering him 5-year deals of 160 plus. The Red Sox reportedly had a $165 million offer on the table, which included deferred money. Of course, if you're going to get deferred money either in Boston or Chicago, you hope to get less deferred money in part of the deal and more overall money. I'm not sure how much of the Red Sox offer was deferred, like Bregman getting $70 million of $175 million deferred, like I said, 20% of his contract deferred. So if the same thing were to happen with the Red Sox offer, it might have been a little bit less, a little under 30. And I don't know if there was anything else that went on behind the scenes that would consider Bregman to go to Chicago, pick Chicago over Boston over $10 million. But that's not important in the Diamondbacks ecosystem. What's more important is I do believe Bregman did listen to Diamondbacks out, and it's like, they must have told him that we'll consider signing you. We just need to figure out what we want to do with Ketel Marte. If he's gone, we'll circle back to you, and we'll give you an offer if we can trade him. Of course, if you follow along with the stuff that I've written, I wrote about that when Gambo came back from his Christmas vacation on December 26th. John Gambadoro. Of course, if I assume everyone watching knows who Gambo is. But he reported that on the air for Burns and Gambo on December 26th, and that's pretty much, I guess I wrote that story basically 3 times over. And, of course, that was the lead topic on that one podcast episode that blew up. But with Alex Bregman, I believe he wanted to wait out the Diamondbacks because Bregman lives in Arizona. He lives in Scottsdale, so certainly the allure of playing in the same metro areas he spends his off-season time at would be certainly enough for Bregman to at least hear the Diamondbacks out. And of course, Ketel Marte offer didn't come to the Diamondbacks' liking. Diamondbacks likely informed Bregman and Scott Boras that, okay, we don't have anything for you. Go ahead and go get whatever the other teams were getting. And of course, Bregman took the Chicago offer. And that's kind of just how it is. Like, the timing of it just adds up that way. Diamondbacks considered signing Bregman if they were going to trade, if they were able to successfully trade Marte, because that would certainly alleviate the drop that would have taken, although the cost to replace Marte, unless they got a controllable starter, that's probably pre-arbitration. I know Diamondbacks discussed Ryan Pipio, Shane Baz. I'm pretty sure they would have asked for Bryce Miller if the Mariners were more interested in the deal. And in Tampa Bay, in Boston, they probably would have wanted either Bayo, Tolley, or Early. So now that Marte deal didn't come together, and Bregman already signed with the Cubs, that's pretty much that pretty much summed up Bregman's free agency. It's like I'm going to guess that he had an offer from both the Cubs and the Red Sox, that they had their OBO. And then he held out to see if the Diamondbacks had something to offer. They didn't, so they left. So he left and took his best offer from the other teams. And in hindsight, now that we know what we know, I feel like that's a case where the Diamondbacks dodged a major bullet. Even though necessarily their pitching didn't get better as a result, I feel like unless you got someone that instantly upgrades the ceiling of the rotation and the bullpen in a Ketel Marte trade, plus their farm system, as you know, the Seattle ask was multiple high-level prospects, although I would have preferred Matt Brash coming into that deal because that would have given the Diamondbacks exactly what they needed for their bullpen. In that situation, I feel like the Diamondbacks paying Marte $14.6 million for a better bat, even though Marte is probably going to be a DH 24 months from now. So we're talking January 2028. Marte will be a full-time DH by then, because the Diamondbacks do have a lot of second base prospects coming up around the next couple of years. You got Troy, Crisantes, and Luis coming up in the next 12 calendar months. We're looking at those guys. Plus, you also have the possibility of Jordan Lawler playing third, and then Lou James Groover, what he does. It's a very fluid infield outside of shortstop. for the Diamondbacks because there's just no long-term solution at first base. Marte is certainly going to age out of second base, and then under the current contract, the Diamondbacks certainly aren't afraid of that, and the contract is set up in a way where if Marte is a full-time DH, he's still well above the break-even point for that. And I feel like instead of spending $30 million a year on Bregman, although I don't know if the Diamondbacks would have gotten a discount for Bregman not having to buy another house or place to stay in during the season, although he does get to stay in his off-season house during spring training. That's a bonus for signing with the Cubs. Maybe that's why he took their offer. But kind of just wrapping up here because I'm just ranting here. I feel like it's a situation where Bregman was interested enough to sign with the Diamondbacks that he was willing to let them decide if they're going to trade Ketel Marte, and when it didn't happen, it's like he just took the best offer they had. And that the deal works out in Diamondbacks' favor because unless they got the perfect pitching combination, the increase in price going from 14.6 to 30 plus on the luxury tax, that would have pushed the Diamondbacks to 220, which is a number that Kendrick said he doesn't envision the team spending. Hitting that number, I feel like that's a case where Diamondbacks kind of dodgeable. I don't know what if they'll finish putting that team together for the final $15 million they might have to spend on their budget. Like I said, there's not a lot of options left that you would feel comfortable with. They could certainly roll the dice on some guys. As I mentioned, some former closers that are not closers for legitimate reasons. You look at Kopech with the injuries, Leclerc. I wrote a couple other guys after the Pierce Johnson piece. Of course, Johnson going to the Reds as free agent options the Diamondbacks could consider. It's like, I'm not sure what their budget is, but certainly there isn't a lot of surety of reliever targets that would be suitable closers, and that's kind of a problem. And maybe they were never in on the top closers. But it's going to be a challenge, I think, for the Diamondbacks to build a successful bullpen in 2026, and I don't think that when we talk about that episode where I said bullish and I changed the title to skeptical, I don't think necessarily 78.5 wins is that crazy of a prediction, considering where the state of the current roster is. So anyways, if you've made it this far in the video, like I said, 17.5 minutes into the video, it's like you've made it farther than most. Like I said, the average, I think from what YouTube's metrics say, the average sit time through these videos is like 6 to 10 minutes. Like I said, we're almost 18 minutes into this podcast episode, so you're in for the long haul at this point. You're not just someone checking in to see what there is to say about Ketel Marte. So, with Marte not being traded, the Diamondbacks still did a trade over the weekend. Jake McCarthy traded to the Colorado Rockies. The Diamondbacks got pitching prospect Josh Gross back from the Colorado Rockies, who the Rockies picked up for Ryan McMahon from the New York Yankees at the trade deadline. So, like I said, it's a situation where the Diamondbacks were going to trade Thomas or McCarthy. It felt like having both on there was not going to necessarily work, even though there was a pathway to play both. And it's a situation where you have too many, I guess you can say too many of the same player, where you have speedy outfielders that the speed doesn't necessarily translate to defense, and questions with the bat, where with Alek Thomas, it's legitimately everything. Can he hit the ball in the air? Is he swinging at strikes? How good's his defense? So Thomas actually was coming off his best year, although it still wasn't very good. And McCarthy was coming off a pretty rough year in 2025. So he got off to a pretty slow start and kind of never really recovered. He hit 206 for the year, and his walk rate completely disintegrated. Now, of course, I still think McCarthy still has something left in the bat. That's why he got traded. If you look at the StatCast metrics, if you do a StatCast search from July 24th on, McCarthy, based on his exit velocity and launch angle data, had an expected average of 260 and an expected slug of 405. Now, if you look at that stretch, McCarthy did have a 406 slugging percentage in that situation, but his batting average certainly underperformed. And that's a situation when you look at it, it's like he should have got hit more singles and fewer doubles based on the quality of contact. And of course, the problem is with that is you can't really necessarily have a fast guy who can't get on base. There's not a lot of offensive value in that profile. If McCarthy was like a singles hitter who drew a double-digit walk rate, he'd be an everyday player. Because that on-base ability and ability to put up 5 to 10 runs of base running value in there. And base running value, unless you're Corbin Carroll, that it kind of catches up on teams. Like, you look at Geraldo Perdomo, for example. Of course, Perdomo's a guy who stole 25 bases in 2025. These guys that are elite base runners. I think Walker in his prime was another guy who was an elite base runner that didn't necessarily get the credit he deserves, although he did have that 11 steal season in, I think it was 24. Or was it 20? It might have been 20. It was either 23 or 24 with Walker's 11 steal season. I remember he kind of went on a stolen base binge at the end of the 23 season. I remember watching from the, okay, here we go. Okay, so yeah, the 11 steal season came in 23. I knew I remembered that one because I remember watching Walker get like insane leads off first base from the press box. And it's like a 223-pound short king. Walker's real height and weight is probably 5'11", 223. Compared to the, he's probably listed at 6'0" and 208. Like, I know, I say 223 because that's what Walker admitted on the radio once in 2024. I think it was 2024. It was, if I remember correctly, it was the same day that Chris Carey got hired by the Oakland A's to be one of their play-by-play announcers. Chris Carey, of course, related to the great Harry Carey. Carey twins are great guys to talk baseball with, I'll say that. So, the Oakland A's, Christian Walker, tangent aside, going back to McCarthy, McCarthy's a guy that he's up and down. Like I said, even year he's a everyday player, and odd year he's unplayable. Kind of situation if you look at his history. Down in 21, up in 22, down in 23, up in 24. Like, forget Jake McCarthy was the unsung hero of the lineup in 24, and then down again in 2025. And if you're the Diamondbacks, you'd rather have a guy that you can count on. And I know Alek Thomas is more reliable because there's something to be said about being reliably bad versus you're not sure what you're getting out of Jake McCarthy. And the Rockies certainly will take a shot at it because McCarthy's game does play at Coors Field because he can stretch out those singles and the doubles and triples at the deep ballpark at Coors Field. He has the speed to run down the ball. Can play all three outfield positions even if he doesn't have the strongest arm. So he would be an ideal fourth outfielder candidate for the Rockies. Well, the Diamondbacks get a pitching prospect. Now, Gross isn't in the Diamondbacks top 30. I didn't see him in the listings for the Yankees on Fangraphs, so not a lot there. And because he was already traded to Diamondbacks, he's not listed on the Rockies top 30 list, so I don't really have much intel to pull on him. But Gross is going to be interesting. Like I said, lottery ticket pitching prospect that could slot into Amarillo's rotation. We've spent a lot of time on this podcast already talking about the top 3 arms that are going to hit Amarillo. Daniel Egan, Diamondbacks top pitching prospect, and probably their only good pitching prospect entering the 2025 season. David Hageman, who's probably the best prospect they picked up at the deadline, and then Ashton Izzy, who is second on that list in top prospects picked up at the deadline. Of course, you can make an argument for Brandon Garcia as well. But put Gross in that same rotation, Amarillo, and Jose Cabrera as their 5th starter in that Amarillo rotation. Of course, it's going to be interesting what they do in Reno. They also added Thomas Hatch on a minor league deal. It feels like the Diamondbacks need to make some decisions on some of the arms they have on their 40-man roster and AAA, because at the end of the season, Hageman, Egan, and Izzy are going to be banging on the door for at least AAA starts, maybe even the big leagues, because Izzy's got a 40-man roster decision coming up after the 2026 season. Egan and Hageman don't until after 27, although they'll be in the major leagues long before the Diamondbacks need to protect them from the Rule 5 draft. Like, that decision will be made during the 2027 season, not after, in regards to those two. So you look at Josh Gross. Gross is another lottery ticket arm. Like I said, he had pretty decent numbers with the Yankees high affiliate. Didn't have good numbers for the Rockies pitching. But again, it's also the Rockies. And of course, his first start actually with the Rockies organization came against the Diamondbacks high affiliate, and they beat him. I don't think Hageman pitched that game. That would have been pretty cool to have guys that came in the trade deadline going into that deal. Like I said, I don't know if Ashton Izzy was part of that deal because Izzy was traded like a week before the deadline. I'll have to check. So we'll check the game log. I'll check the game log for Ashton Izzy just for fun. See if we see. Nope, he did not pitch that game. He did pitch in that series, but not that game. Izzy did have a pretty good game against Spokane. Actually pitched pretty decent. Game score 53. Again, Izzy's kind of the underrated arm because Hageman gets all the headlines from that deadline haul. But kind of a situation where you look at Josh Gross, it's like he's a lottery ticket. Certainly gives the Diamondbacks another dart with starting pitching. Coming out of a program, you look at Eastern Carolina, very good mid-major that competes at the top level. And of course, there's a lot of good schools in that state of North Carolina, but a lot of good programs out there. It's a program that can compete with the top teams, is basically how it is. But kind of the aside, it's like I said, another high quality dart, even if the numbers don't necessarily reflect that in his career. He had a 3.85 ERA with the Yankees in his first year, and then did decently in the second year. Maybe not a high ceiling guy. Maybe he's a future reliever. If we look at the stuff necessarily, and the fact that there's superior pitching prospects close to his level already when we talk about Egan, Izzy, and Hageman. But like I said, it's a case where you're not sure whether you have a guy that's out of options, what to do with him, and you already have another out of options outfielder that you have to consider with Torrey Barossa, who probably has less trade value than McCarthy. And that's why you would make that move. And Barossa becomes your fourth outfielder as a result. It's one of those things where you have players of equal value would just offload to a team that's willing to take them. That's kind of how I feel with the McCarthy situation, the Diamondbacks. And it's kind of a bummer because McCarthy actually was the first player that I interviewed when Jack Summers and I started the Arizona Diamondbacks on SI in September 2022. It was actually the second game that I covered. I kind of missed those moments where you get to talk to the players, but I won't speak on that much further because I could do some serious damage to myself if I talk about what happened there. But anyways, 27 minutes into the video. If you enjoyed the content so far and you want to keep the channel going and keep the podcast going, make sure to subscribe and leave a like on the channel. Like I said, what do you and let us know what you think your biggest concern with the 2026 season is. For me, it's going to be the bullpen. And of course, that might be unanimous in that situation. Diamondbacks bullpen situation is interesting. And it's a situation where I think maybe just one high-profile reliever and then you just figure out the rest as the season comes along, I think is going to be what they're going to have to do. You figure out, because I feel like the hardest inning for the teams to figure out is the ninth inning. That's why the guy pitching the ninth inning gets the big bucks, and why the guys that should pitch the ninth inning got snatched up quickly in the free agent thing. Pretty much proven closers went off faster than starters. We're still not even close on the starting pitching market, but it feels like the reliever market is more or less gone and went. There's not much there. It's just a carcass. And the Diamondbacks can only pick out what little rotting meat is left, more or less. Like I said, dumpster diving is another way to describe it. So as I mentioned earlier, like Sir Anthony Dominguez, I've mentioned him multiple times on the podcast. It's like, if the Diamondbacks want to make a splash with the bullpen, that's the move they make. So Dominguez has 40 career saves, 18 coming with the Phillies, his rookie year of 2018. He had 16 saves. And he had 10 with the Baltimore Orioles in 2024 as he filled in for Felix Bautista. So there is some past closer experience with Dominguez, although he's served more as a setup man in recent years with the Phillies and the Blue Jays in their postseason runs. But when I look at those things, it's like, that's fine. You'll take a guy with proven postseason experience, decent numbers. The walk rate's a little bit high, but the strikeout rate is really high as well. We're talking, I think it's like 30% strikeout rate and 13% walk rate. Now, of course, you don't necessarily want that walk rate as your in the ninth inning, because a closer that doesn't have it is potentially a loss in the making because games are that tight, and a couple walks turns a save situation into a nail biter. And certainly you want guys that want to throw pump strikes, get swings and misses, and Dominguez does get swings and misses at a pretty good rate. So you can look that up on StatCast. You can look at whiff rates and swing strike rates you can find on Fangraphs. Dominguez feels like the safest bet on the open market. Otherwise, you're rolling the dice on either injured or unproven players or guys past their prime. And unfortunately, Hazen's track record with that is not necessarily good. If you look at it, he had a pretty good hit on Fernando Rodney in year one, and then it flopped with Brad Boxberger, a burgeoning closer that he thought he could pick up in the trade market. That didn't work. Tried Greg Hall in 2019. That didn't work either. Tried Archie Bradley. That didn't work either. Then there wasn't a closer in 21. Tried Mark Melancon in 22. That didn't work. I think Melancon didn't last year. Then Melancon got hurt the next year. Diamondbacks tried a closer by committee thing. Andrew Chafin and Miguel Castro couldn't do it. Scott McGuff couldn't do it either. So Hazen paid up the wazoo for Paul Sewald, and the Diamondbacks made it to the World Series. And of course, they tried to do the Sewald again in 2024, but then he kind of flopped in the second half of the 24 season. Kind of put in that. But the upside of that year was Hazen picked up A.J. Puck at the deadline, and Puck ended up becoming the Diamondbacks' best reliever, while at the same time, Justin Martinez broke out on the mound. So now the Diamondbacks had two closer options going into 25. But then both of them got hurt on the first road trip of the year. Martinez blew, both pitchers blew, Puck blew his elbow out, and the injury never really recovered. It was slow recovery, and they just decided elbow surgery. And in Martinez's case, he had a dead arm period around the same time, so they had to put him on the IL to give his arm some rest. Comes back, a couple games, pitches for a couple weeks, and then blows his arm out against Seattle. And it will probably, I would say, the loss that kind of put the Diamondbacks on the back foot for the season. They were kind of trending down without Puck to begin with, but I feel like losing Martinez was kind of the death blow for the Diamondbacks roster, especially since it came a week after Corbin Burns suffered a similar fate. So the Diamondbacks were out with their three high ceiling arms were gone by June 10th. And that's kind of a bummer too. And then Shelby Miller filled in. He gets hurt again. And Diamondbacks, basically their bullpen disintegrated by July, by the All-Star break, more or less. And while I would blame more the Diamondbacks offense going cold, it could be a situation where not being comfortable with your bullpen led to too much pressing at the plate and the lack of offensive results. When you look at that dreadful 10-game stretch, they went 1-9 and went from 500 coming out of their first series out of the All-Star break and then just collapsed. Now, of course, they came back and made the season somewhat more respectable at the end, but that 10-game stretch is what defined the 2025 season, unfortunately. It was a situation where they just ran out of juice. The team that they tried to run it with ran out of gas. So, biggest problem is the repeat of that. And I feel like if the bullpen doesn't look better in 2026, it's going to be a lot of calls for both Torey Lovell and Mike Hazen to be finding employment somewhere else, more or less, to say the same. Of course, I'm not going to lead that because I feel like the Diamondbacks are in pretty good shape with the manager situation. There aren't very many managers I would trade Lovell for. Hazen's kind of a different boat. I feel like Hazen's done a terrible job with the bullpen year to year. Rest of the roster, not so bad. But at the same time, the Diamondbacks' best two relievers won't be much of a factor in the most important parts of the season. And that's kind of a concerning thing for me. Of course, we talk about 2026 concerns. It's like, I'm not sure how this bullpen's going to hold together. And it's going to take a lot of guys that you wouldn't expect to be a factor in the 2026 season to kind of step up there. You're looking at the Dre Jamesons, the Yilber Diaz, Brandon Garcia, another name I threw. Juan Murillo is going to be a big part of what happens in 2026. Maybe even Hayden Dirk as well, because if Dirk shows any more improved strike throwing ability in AAA, he's going to be on the major league roster sooner rather than later. Those guys are going to be just as important as who Hazen tabs as the closer, because it doesn't matter if whether or not you're blowing games in the ninth inning, if you're blowing games in the 6th, 7th, and 8th inning going in. Like you kind of have to figure it out between those guys. And I think Diaz is an upside play. If the Diamondbacks wanted to slowly trend towards the back end of the bullpen, I feel like it's a situation with an open bullpen that you wouldn't mind seeing what Diaz can handle, and you slowly build up the workload. And I think maybe he's your high leverage setup man once Puck and Martinez are back and healthy situation. That's kind of how I see it. And you hope also Jameson stays healthy and can do a better job of spotting his fastball and setting up that untouchable slider. And Garcia, I feel like, is a name that's underrated. Garcia, I think, very underrated. He's got electric stuff, and he's shown swing and miss ability against some of the best hitters in baseball. He asked the Dodgers about that. And I feel like with more reps, I think he's going to gain the confidence, and he has the confidence and stuff will make him I guess you can say an AJ Puck replacement as the top left-hander in the bullpen. And I feel like with Garcia, you feel comfortable moving on with Puck if he shows any growth in 2026. Although I still like the idea of bringing back Puck in 2027 nonetheless, if that's an option. But if the Diamondbacks can somehow make it work with that bullpen, I feel like that kind of just sets up the rest of the game. They have enough offense. Maybe you figure out the bottom half of your order. and who replaces Gurriel in left field. But again, the bullpen takes pressure off the rotation, takes pressure off the lineup. And they can fix that. I think they'll do better than 78.5 wins in 2026. Maybe they could surprise people and contend, although I wouldn't necessarily predict that until the games are played. So that's pretty much what I have to say on that. Like I said, Ketel Marte is here for the long haul. Alex Bregman's gone as a result. And Jake McCarthy has got off to hopefully better opportunities with the Rockies, more or less. So thanks everyone for watching again. Another episode of D-Backs Under Review podcast out there. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe to D-Backs Under Review YouTube channel. If you see it light up, hit it. See button, hit button. As they say. So, more or less, the next episode will be out on Friday. Well, hopefully something happens with the bullpen between now and the next one. So, take care.